Hi everyone, I'm Brandon Acker. I am a musician, I'm a YouTuber, and I'm a director of the online music school Arpeggiato. Today I'm really pleased to have as a guest Elam Rotem. Elam is a composer, a singer, and a harpsichordist based in Basel, Switzerland. He's a leading expert in early music, specifically the music of the turn of the century, of the 17th century. He's the founder and director of the group Perfetti della Quinta and runs Early Music Sources. That's an educational YouTube channel and website. That YouTube channel, by the way, is at 97,000 subscribers. It's almost at 100,000, which is at that point, I believe you'll get an award. And so maybe I can ask my followers here to help you out and go over to Early Music Sources and subscribe to Elam's channel. You'll see when you get there, it's just an incredible wealth of information. So, hey Elam, how you doing?
Great, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really happy you could do this. As you might know already, I'm a huge fan of Early Music Sources, but also just the recordings you've been putting out with your colleagues, the vocal a cappella recordings, but also the music with continuo and voice and everything. I mean, it's just some of the best recordings I've heard of that. Like, for example, like early 17th century music. It's just really, really well done.
Thanks very much. I'm happy.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to bring you on because I myself have learned so much from watching your videos on topics like, basso continuo, temperaments, improvisation in different periods, ornamentation. And the videos are so well done and fun, and there's all these great graphics, very easy to follow. And specifically, I wanted to talk to you because on my YouTube channel, it matters a lot to me to maybe expose others who might not be aware of early music to lutes and the instruments I play, early plucked instruments that I really love. And I love talking about, historical temperaments, moving the frets, improvisation, how they can read directly from facsimiles, the pictures of manuscripts. And I'm trying to encourage more interest in early music myself. But in my opinion, nobody's doing the early music education better than what you're doing on your channel. So I've mentioned to my followers before that they should go check out your YouTube channel. But I thought it'd be even better to bring you on and formally just talk to you about early music, about why we find it interesting, why we specialize in these time periods. And hopefully my goal is to help people who maybe either aren't interested in this style yet, just don't know anything about it, maybe extend an olive branch and tell people why it is that we like early music and talk about the subject of, authenticity. Can we be authentic? Why play early music in the first place? How to approach it if perhaps they'd like to learn more. So maybe the best way to start, Elam, is to say, in your own words, what is Early Music Sources, and maybe why did you start it?
So Early Music Sources was and is first and foremost a database of sources. When I came to Basel to study basso continuo, I learned about many things, and you learn about what are the sources, for each things that you are interested in. But it was still quite hard to just get those sources. Even if some were available online, just a list of them of a particular subject, for example, you had to go to a dictionary in German, a music dictionary in German, and to look at the little fonts there. And in the beginning, earlymusicsources.com was in fact bassocontinuosources.com.
Oh, I didn't know.
Where I just put the list of the main sources that I learned about, and then found links online to them. So that was the first idea. And then it kind of grew more and more until I realized I can just put all, the main treatises and the main sources that we can learn about from. And that was earlymusicsources.com. And then we started to make the videos. And the idea of the videos was basically to share things that we learned. And we thought that it's weird that not everyone knows them because they are so interesting and great. And just to put things on the table. And I keep doing it today. There are many conventions of how things are done, and often they are kind of different from historical, what is described in historical documents. And me and my colleagues are there not to say, hey guys, you're wrong, but just to put on the table what we do know. And it's always interesting. It's never, black and white. It's never this is right and this is wrong. It's always a big mess. And it's great. And I make sure to always include some music in it. So it's not just, dry information, but that it is combined with things that I find beautiful, just aesthetically.
Well, that's one of the things I think that works so well, is that you're not just a musicologist just describing what sounds could be like, and perhaps they did this. Nothing wrong with being a musicologist only, of course, but the fact that you can do that and you're delivering with such clarity these subjects, but then you say, for example, if you're improvising in this style, I could do this, and then you just sing something, or you play harpsichord, and you show how it might be done. And by the way, here's a recording of us singing this, example. So I think, why are we listening to early music and interested in the first place? It's the aesthetic of the music. We just love it.
Yeah,
it's emotional.
Absolutely.
First.
We are all here for the music. That's the core of the thing. That's yes. Obvious. The intellectual side is a bonus. And in fact, I know many musicians who are not so interested in that. And it's fine,
I myself have never been, before getting into playing classical guitar and then lutes and things, I was never particularly interested in history. And it was all about music, all about the pure emotion of it and just playing. And I played in a rock band and then classical guitar. And it was always just because I liked the music. But I found myself only getting interested in musicology, getting interested in history and reading these early sources just because it enhanced my understanding of the music, and I could in turn play in a way that was more interesting to me and feel closer to something of the past that I found so beautiful, playing on gut strings, reading from the manuscript. It's a feeling that I can't replicate in any other way.
Absolutely. I also find that many sources open our minds in ways that we could never imagine, because the way that those people talked about music is sometimes so weird to us, as if their brains were, connected differently. And just this openness to, maybe you can also see it like this. Because of course we see and understand and hear things because of, our education and the music that we heard and the way we heard it played and so on. And just to read descriptions of things that are so different from that, it's sometimes mind-blowing.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to talk about in general was just the topic of early music with you. And since you you studied at the Schola Cantorum in Basel, which, by the way, for me feels like a distant magic place where the best, scholarship and some of the best musical performances are taking place for early music. It sounds like an amazing place to study and meet colleagues and things. And
it's a little Hogwarts, that's for sure. Yeah. At least in the first year. For example, for keyboard players and organ players, you have such an amazing collection of instruments. It's like your birthday.
Yeah. Well, it's just it sounds like a dream place to go. And if things were different in my life at the moment, I would love to go there and do a lute degree there. And who knows, maybe it'll happen at some point. But I want to kind of transition to a larger topic about early music in general. And from your perspective, why should anybody who isn't already aware of it, why should anybody listen to early music in your opinion? I mean, we're modern people. In 2023, we have synthesizers and we have all these powerful, music programs to make music in a new way. And there's infinite possibilities that haven't yet been realized in music. So why go backward to Italian music from 1604? I mean, it just feels like museum music from the outside. So in your opinion, why go there? Why should people be interested in early music?
Well, first of all, they don't have to. But second, it's the same reason that we go to Venice and see how amazing it is. or go to a museum and see amazing paintings that moves our emotions. It's the same thing. It's just another kind of art. Yeah, I really don't think that it's different from any other kind of art, and it doesn't matter when is it from. If we find it, that it lifts our spirit or moves our emotions, that's the reason why we do it.
I couldn't agree more.
Why we listen to it and why we create it.
But so for you, you have access. You have Spotify and all these and different outlets that you could be listening to. For you, why do you go to early music emotionally? What is it about? Is there something that you find there that you get emotionally that lifts your spirits in a way that I don't know, listening to something, a modern band who maybe you also like doesn't give you? What's yourself if you had to choose right now, I want to listen to something? What is it about early music that draws you in that direction?
First of all, I must comment that I don't like that you refer to early music as a genre.
Really?
What do you mean actually when you say early music?
Well, actually, that's exactly one of the topics I wanted to get into, because this term is a bit problematic. It's actually too vague. I mean, we're talking about many genres over hundreds of years, which
Exactly.
have completely different styles. So what does, what do they have in common 200 years later? When I often say to some of my students who they say, oh, I'm playing Baroque music, so I should follow this rule. And I said, well, where and when are you? Because, we just think about the 90s, the 90s in US pop music. In 10 years, you can't play the same music anymore. It's made fun of. I mean, you get made fun of for listening to disco and the emo music and, these trends that in boy bands, these things were the most popular music on the charts. And suddenly, just decades later, they're out of fashion. So why was it any different, in the 1600s, for example? So perhaps that's your point, that it's just, there is no, early music in that sense.
Well,
we can't
this
put it.
term to refer to early music as one unit is just a bit weird for me. I think commonly when people say early music, they mean Western music from the Middle Ages until, I don't know, 1800 or something, and then it's, I don't know what, classical music. It's completely arbitrary.
Yeah.
So why I would change your question to why I like the music that I like. That's a difficult question. Maybe it speaks the language that I feel that I understand the most, or that touches me the most. The language of music, it means, the rules of how it works and the harmonies and the progressions that it employs. That touches me most. Or the ways, for example, that composers treat text. I find that very, very special in the late Renaissance and early Baroque. And it's something that I don't see so much in pop, for example.
Right.
So I guess there are many reasons, and also I like different kinds of what you call early music. And so it's a hard question.
It is a hard question. What is your favorite genre with this umbrella term? If we're talking generally about music from 1400 to 1800, to be very open here, is there one that you particularly moves you?
The era that I specialize in is the late Renaissance. So from the middle of the 16th century until the first decades of the 17th century in Italy. That's the thing that I studied the most, and that the music that I perform the most. And I feel most at home.
I'd love to talk about the idea of kind of authenticity. We hear about this term a lot in academia, and the second you start playing Baroque music, for a lot of people, they play modern the instruments, they play violin, piano, I mean, modern, again, in quotations. All these terms need to be unpacked, I guess. But when we start playing, you say, okay, now we're going to play a piece by Bach. You have to have a conversation about authenticity or maybe historically informed performance, hip, right? And what does this mean to you, authenticity? And I mean, what does it mean to be authentic? And is it even possible? How do you view this term? How do you deal with it in your own music making?
So, rightfully so, the term authenticity went away from the conversation already, I think, in the 90s or so. In the beginning of the early music movement, people talked about authenticity and say, yeah, now we do it authentically. But actually, it's clear that there is no such thing. And then they changed to historically informed or historically inspired performance, where you inform yourself about old practices and you see what do you choose to take from it and what works for you. And yeah, I think it's very personal for every performer. It's very different. Some see themselves, in fact, as authentic. Yeah, in this source it says so, and this is exactly how we do it, so we are great. It's never true, of course. And some are more free. You say, yeah, I know they do it like this, but I think it's most beautiful with this instrument, or I don't know what. Yeah, but that's a very important conversation to make when you're making your own things. What I find important is to think about the context where this music was conceived and performed. For example, intimate madrigals that were probably meant to be performed by 4 people sitting around a table, either for themselves or for some very selected audience in a small and beautiful room. It would be a bit weird to sing them in a huge choir with a conductor. Yeah, for example. And yeah, and it comes in many, many different levels. And you know, which kind of instruments you use and the pitch and whatnot.
I really like what you said, and it reminded me of some conversations I've had with maybe often classical guitarists, since I did 2 degrees in classical guitar, so I spent a lot of time talking to classical guitarists and have a lot of friends before I really went full into playing early music. These days I really only perform early music besides doing like educational content on YouTube and things. And what I often find when I talk to, maybe we could say 19th century forward performers who are really living in that repertoire, what I often find is that there's almost like I think people might be intimidated by words like authenticity that you rightfully point out. It's a good thing that we moved on to words like inspired and informed, which are just more reasonable and I think less intimidating words, because it makes it sound less like it must be done this way and the early music police are coming after you.
Exactly. As if someone is right and someone is wrong. We are all wrong and it's fine. That's life, sadly. We have to find ways to be, to be happy about what we do and to do it in a way that we believe is nice and, support the pieces that we do and don't go against them.
So how can we speak to someone who, for example, is a pianist or a classical guitarist or a violinist, and they've only really lived in the language, the style, styles, for example, of in the 19th century? What are the goods, waiting for you if you say, I'm going to play, I can already play the right notes at the right tempo with good technique, because they're all great musicians and they can play this music. But what is to be gained from your perspective about looking at the sources? What can this person who hasn't yet gone down that path gain from entertaining these ideas?
I can't promise anything. Maybe he'll gain only frustration. I don't know. I think it's fascinating. For example, if some pianist played Bach on a piano, and then he said, oh, actually, but Bach mostly played harpsichord. I think it would be fascinating to try and play a harpsichord and see, the different possibilities that it brings. And it puts the music in a completely different light. And as a player, you have to deal with it differently. Yeah. Or going back to the, vocal music, if a piece is performed with 30 people versus if it's performed with 4 people, it's just different music that you can do different things with it. And again, people can, do whatever they want, but I think it's nice to at least try to look for the version that perhaps the composer had in mind. Of course, we don't know. But, to try out, as I said. If you're a pianist, try to play Bach on a harpsichord, see what happens.
What about in terms of ornamentation? Often we hear things, quotes from people like Couperin, I think it is, who talks about how we speak is different than how we write. How we perform music is very different than what's on the page. How can performers start? What can they do to go start learning how to improvise and get less attached to the score and think in a more maybe in a way that some did at the time, of thinking off the page? Because I think, at least now, in my experience with non early music centered programs like the Schola Cantorum, the conservatories are often not leading one to leave the university with ideas of thinking off the page as much. It's very much like, we have so much to worry about with just being a good musician, just knowing, your instrument technique, music theory, music history, and being able to perform well, that seems to be in a bubble what people are trying to achieve. So it seems to almost go against all that training to then say, yeah, but depending on the composer and score, 50% of what's supposed to happen is you have to, add here. That's one of the most interesting things for me, at least, is learning how to do that. Do you have any recommendations for people how can you go in that direction? Are there sources or secondary sources even that people could start reading to open their mind up to approaching music in that more open way?
I completely agree. This issue of playing off the page is something that might be difficult for many. For example, for me as a keyboard player, most of the things keyboard players would have done back in the day, at least in the, let's say 17th century, was to play basso continuo, where you kind of have improvising all the time. Or as church musicians, playing the organ, you would just have to improvise all the time. Yeah. And, supply music for a certain duration of time, and then they will, you will get a sign, okay, now you stop, and then you have to make a nice cadence. So this was something which was really part of life for musicians. And so when I started as a keyboard player, I started trying to learn basso continuo, and then, you get only a little bit of your left hand, and you have to complete the rest. Yeah. And that's a very good start. And concerning ornamentations, there are many treatises that gives you examples of, famous pieces and how they were performed. In practice, with all the little ornaments and diminutions. There are really many sources. Yeah. Sometimes there are even several sources of the same piece, and they are always different. Some with more ornaments, some with less, some with just different ornaments. And I think once you start to get into this environment, you slowly get it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and it kind of relates to my own experience. It's just little by little, learn a new topic, try it out for a bit. It's like being immersed in a new language. It is a language. It's each style feels that way to me, and one of the most intimidating things coming into this this world. We could say music pre-1800 maybe. One of the things I found most intimidating was the fact that there were these different genres and that I was expected to play not just a lute, but in which type of lute? Oh, it turns out there are like 23 lutes. And depending on which music we're playing and when, I need a different instrument. How's that going to happen? And then different tunings, and then and then how you actually play your instrument, what you're meant to do, the types of ornaments. So at the beginning, I felt quite overwhelmed, with that whole.
At the beginning, you just thought it's early music, and you just need an early music instrument.
Just tell me the rules, and I'll do them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But of course, it's so much more nuanced. But what I've enjoyed about figuring that out, once I got past the mountain of intimidation, what's so nice is zooming in on any one area and then just living there for a while. But one of the, I mean, I'd be interested in your experience, Elam, because one of the challenges I face as an early music performer today is I do have lots of instruments now. I've gradually acquired more and more. I realized at some point that just having a Renaissance lute doesn't cut it. It allows me to play a certain style at a certain time. But what happens when I have to play in a Monteverdi opera? Well, it turns out I need a different instrument, or let alone Handel or Bach or something.
Not only instrument, different playing techniques and so on.
Exactly. One of the other things I've faced that I find difficult, especially when approaching, playing early music as a full-time performer, is that from one day to the next, you can just hop languages and hop time. But you could jump 150 years in the future. Now we're at 392. Now we're at 465, and it's so extreme, sonically, physically. Just hearing the languages, just changing styles like that. And one of the things I realized at some point was, oh yeah, this is a modern thing. Like at the time, they weren't trying to play medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, Galant. They weren't trying to play all those things.
They were just doing the thing that people did then.
Yeah.
It was their, pop. It was their, the natural thing.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing about fashions. As you mentioned before, if you now listen to 90s disco music, people will laugh at you. Yeah. If you now, I don't know, you go outside with clothing from 20 years ago, it will look a bit weird. If you go from 40 years ago, it will be almost funny. And the clothes from 400 years ago would look like a costume,
yes.
Like a complete joke.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a little thing that we also have to accept, that perhaps for our taste, performances from 400 years would sound like a joke. I was open to this idea when I listened a little bit to historical recordings from 100 years ago or even more. Some things sound so weird to us. Yeah, and it's just a glimpse into how things might have been even before. How foreign would it be for us? And that's a case for us also when something seems weird to us, perhaps to nevertheless try it out, to really try it out. Not to try twice and say, nah, that's weird and ugly, or that's too difficult. To really try something that sounds weird for us, because maybe it's something else, but we need to kind of unlock it and to kind of learn to like it. If we'll only, go with what is natural for us, maybe we won't go so far.
I never thought about this subject exactly like you've just characterized it before.
And think about the standards we have for performances now, thanks to recordings, that everything is perfect and together and in tune.
Right.
Probably things were not always perfect and together and in tune. And it was okay, maybe.
I almost don't believe the dates that are on some of these operas. Like, oh, well, the composer was finishing up writing all the recitative for this opera, which was debuting in 2 weeks. So I hear stories like this, and perhaps I'm misremembering exactly the dates, but the dates never seem, based on the composition date being finished to the performance date. I always think, how are they practicing? How did they memorize this music? I mean, one of the light bulb moments I had was kind of what you were saying. They played just the way they played, and they were completely immersed in that sound, which means they all had the right expectations, and they were formulas, and they weren't flipping styles and changing dramatically their technique and their approach. They had a way. And it's like a little bit when you go to see, like a live session, like an Irish music live session. Like, these guys have 300, 400 songs in their heads, and they can play them. You can go up and request a song, and they can play, hey, let's do a D major. And then they're playing, Molly Malone in D major, and they all know it on different instruments, and they can all take turns singing. And I think, how do they do this? Well, they're playing these songs again and again and again and again, and in many different ways, and they're always jamming. And they just live and breathe this music. And so in that way, when someone says the score's coming, you don't think, well, I have no idea whether I'm playing atonal music with extended techniques or, again, recitative in these likely keys, the recitative before the aria. Like, you're going to have the right expectations, which makes that transition easier. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess we also have these things that we know exactly what it is. It's just not in this music. It's probably in other styles, things that our parents played for us when we were young, or I don't know what.
So on the topic of historical recordings, I loved your video on that topic, and I think you did a really good job showing some examples. In my own field, playing classical guitar. One of the things I encountered on that subject. Do you know the composer Francisco Tárrega? He's a well-known Spanish classical guitar. He's one of we call him like the Chopin of the guitar, and he writes beautiful Spanish music, and it's very, very just beautiful music, very good to play. But one of the things about it, in terms of performance practice, that I find so fascinating, is he writes so many portamenti on the instrument, and guitarists almost unanimously today have decided that we don't do those. So it's become absolutely standardized that you ignore those, and nobody plays them on the recordings, which is really funny to think about. There's this one Tárrega arrangement of a Chopin piece, which is particularly interesting because, of course, the piano wouldn't have done it, but the Prelude No. 7 by Chopin. Very simple little waltz. And in Tárrega's version, he does. the big portamento. Instead of just bum, ba-dum, bum, bum,
yeah,
he goes. And the whole piece is just filled with these. And he tells you not just that you should do a portamento, but he tells you where does it start. And you would think, would do like maybe something like that, but he says go all the way back to here, and so he calculates the portamento, the interval. And like I said, no one does this today. And in my playing, I love it because it sounds very vocal, and it gives you a hint at what they were probably doing. The singers, for example, how they maybe were realizing it. But
what you just did, this is for me early music.
What do you mean?
So it's not a period. It's the way you treat the music.
I like that. That's kind of one of those things I wish we had a recording of, for example, of Tárrega playing for 10 seconds. That would tell us so much. But the notation. This is one example where the notation is so clear. And then you wonder, well, if this is how they played, and he wrote that down, what other things did they do that we would never expect that they didn't
absolutely
write down?
And this is what I meant when I said that the historical recordings, they just give us a little glimpse into how different things can be.
Yeah.
Another thing a similar thing that happened to me is when so there is this famous mass by Guillaume de Machaut, Mass de Notre Dame.
Okay.
And it had, of course, many performances, and many people followed kind of the English tradition of singing, which is like very nice and clean and so on. But then somewhere in the 90s, a French ensemble recorded the same mass, but with some Corsican singers that had their own traditions of how to sing. And they simply did this music that until now was available only as as angelical choirs, and now it sounds like something completely different, simply completely different. And then, of course, people say, no, it's not possible that they sing it like Corsicans, this is a later tradition, or... But when you think about it, you realize that also the so-called English tradition is as invented and as not necessarily historical as any other way you might suggest how to sing it.
Yeah.
And this was really an eye-opening moment for me, realizing that actually we don't know, and the possibilities are there are a lot of possibilities.
Yeah. Today's video is brought to you by Meze. That's the company who made this really beautiful set of headphones that I'm wearing. These are the 109 Pro model. I've had 2 sets of headphones by this company, and they're just some of the best I've ever used. Super comfortable. Honestly, I have kind of a big head, and that's usually been a problem with headphones. With these, they're not. And also, they just sound super clear. I use them for all my YouTube videos, and I just love the look. I love the gold, and actually there's real, I think it's walnut wood on the actual ears of the headphones. All the specs are on their website, which I'll include a link to in the description. And for now, we'll head back to the video, but please do check these out. That reminds me of one other story. I was in my master's, and we were talking about John Dowland, lute songs. And someone brought up in the class for discussion, they brought up the famous CD that Sting did. He did Sting that did some lute songs by John Dowland. Even like sang it, I think, at the Grammys or something. There was some type of an award show. So for a mainstream audience, there's Sting holding a lute, playing Dowland, and at the time, I was just getting into playing lute, and I was like, oh no, this can't be. This is so wasn't how it was done. He's singing this way, and in the class I brought it up and I raised my hand. Yeah, but this is not historical, and he's singing in a way that they wouldn't have sang, and this is not right. And the teacher was a very good teacher, a musicologist, and she looked at me and she said, oh, interesting, Brandon. Okay, please enlighten us. How did they sing? How should Dowland be sung? And I realized I had no answer, and I had no. I could say nothing. That they sung like this, with this much vibrato, or the lack thereof, with this much portamenti. What could I say? With what timbre did they sing? I mean, they sang these words with these notes, maybe other notes, maybe improvisation. And I realized in that moment that was my big eye-opener, that I had no idea what I was saying. And I just had this idea that there was, like you said earlier, a right way and a wrong way, the authentic and the inauthentic. And that in that one moment with that question, she just kind of shattered my perception.
I remember when this Sting thing came out, and I probably thought to myself, wow, well, this is stupid. Why did it even do it? But thinking about it now, I think that's great. Probably many people then went to listen to Dowland and looked up his music and tried it out.
Yeah.
And many of the albums that I grew up on and became in love with early music, I now look back and I say, wow, I wouldn't do the same choices that they do, and it was like on a scholarly level this is quite poor, and this is a weird choice of instruments, but still these things inspired me enough to get into it and learn more. So I think it's great. We should have whatever, and it might bring nice things.
Continuing with that idea, if you take that experience you had and just extend it further, where would you like to see this movement, if we can call it that, in the future?
Well, I think that there are two general directions. One is just to extend a little bit, because as I said, traditionally early music was, including the 18th century, but not much beyond. But I think slowly the 19th century is included more and more, both with instruments, the romantic piano or the romantic pianos. That there are so many kinds, and you wouldn't take the same piano you use for Beethoven, for Schubert and Chopin and Liszt. Yeah. So exploring these things and having more recordings that are trying to do it. And 19th century symphonic repertoire played also with historically inspired instruments. So this is a direction where there is still a lot to do, and of course also the playing techniques and so on. And another direction is the participation in creation of music, because musicians always created music. They rarely performed early music. Yeah. Monteverdi played mainly Monteverdi and pieces from his colleague composers, maybe one generation before. And otherwise he created, and many musicians created music. And we might want to create also and participate in this.
Like you are. I actually didn't know you were a composer.
Sometimes I make my own music, yeah.
That's great.
Composer,
I mean, like you said, that's the spirit of the time. I mean, there wasn't this, there weren't these boundaries between performer, musicologist, composer, person who improvises, and person who does not. This is like this is
just
you
a
were
musician.
everything. Yeah.
A musician who creates music.
Yeah.
Who supplies music even.
It seems, it also seems to me, since I kind of left that idea, and that's something I did have in my degree, in my degrees I did, I remember thinking, I'm a performance major. It says anything, classical guitar performance. And I remember someone asked me, oh, can you perform one of your own pieces? And I said, oh, I'm not a composer. And I remember very defensively, no, I'm a performer, not a composer, like as if they were completely different planets. And since spending a lot of time playing early music and inevitably improvising figured bass and preludes and things, you basically become a composer. Improvising is spontaneously composing. And I realized at some point, if you can't compose something, then you can't really understand it. If you can't compose in a similar style, you don't understand it as well as you could. And one of the best exercises some of my teachers had me do was, for example, I was playing a Handel opera and I was complaining about every recit seemed difficult in terms of how to approach it. And he said, just compose your own recit. So just look at 20 Handel recits and then take the text from one, pick a key, and then write your own. And so I wrote my own, and based on the formulas that I had to detect, okay, he typically starts here, then he goes here, and from there he uses that to go there, and he ends like this. And then I kind of made my own, and suddenly there was this pattern in my mind, and I realized, oh, and every time I play a Handel opera, I'm like, oh, he's just doing the same, he always does that. But I never detected it until I had to compose it myself. And have you had that insight with your own composing? Has that expanded
Absolutely.
your view of when you actually then play composed music?
The time in my life where my contrapuntal knowledge spiked was when I was composing. Just learning counterpoint is equivalent to learning how to survive in the desert with no compass. But composing, then you just have to find a way. You have to find a way to bring this fifth voice without making parallels. And then, oh, this is a very famous idiom, and I just discovered it myself.
Wow.
So by creating music, you definitely learn a lot about music. And that in turn helps you perform it in mostly a better way.
I can say for myself, at least, I've always thought about composing more for classical guitar, for lute. But the thing that stops me, the hurdle I find that's a barrier is I say, okay, here we go. I can improvise something. So I try to improvise something and I go, you know what? I'm going to make this to a piece. I'm actually going to write down and say, this is the name of the piece and this is the final result. But one of the things that stops me in my tracks is it's just never good enough in compared to playing Weiss or Vise or some other lute composer that I have as the, I put him on a pedestal. And for me, it has to be that good. And if I can't compose something that I think is as good, which I can't, then I just say, well, I must not be good enough, and I give up. Do you have a way out of that, or do you just simply not compare yourself to the other composers you play? I mean,
I can only compose, in my level of composition, and I cannot compose like Cipriano de Roro, for example. It's like way above my level. And when I compose, I actually composed in a genre which is slightly easier, and it's the genre that I felt that I can compose in. And yeah, and if you're unhappy, try again. Go to Weiss and look what he's doing. Oh, he's doing this. Why and where? Try to transpose it. Maybe try just to put it in your piece. And make it coherent somehow. There are many things you can do.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I'll try to come back to it. Something I've always wanted to do is get back to some composing, but especially for those reasons, like how it changes your mind, and then you can never perform the same way because you get something clicks. You can't see the score in the same light. I see most scores now, whereas I used to look at them as some monolithic finished thing that if you moved one note, the whole thing would fall apart. Now I often play and I see a early 19th century guitar piece and I go, this is just an improvisation with, on this ground with a series of 7/6 suspensions. Like I could have improvised that.
Exactly.
It seems obvious actually. And this could have gone 20 ways here, but he went that way. And suddenly everything changes. And even then how you play it changes because you know what it's like to improvise. But if you never go there, you're just playing the notes. You're saying the words without knowing what they mean.
You just execute.
Yes, but then you can do weird things. You can, on a strong suspension or something, you can, instead of being bottom, you can play pump pump or something because you don't get the function of the tool that you're using in that moment. Exactly. So that's something I found very useful. Elam, there's two more things I'd love to talk with you about if you have time. Do you have a bit more time?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. The one thing I wanted to ask you, because we messaged about this at some point, I was wondering about your research on your website and channel about the lute, since that's the world I live in, and if you would do more, if you were planning on doing more with the featuring the lute and the history of the lute or something like that. And I was surprised to hear you say that you felt it was a challenging subject to deal with. And I wonder if you could talk a bit more about that to your comfort level, of course. What's your perspective on trying to understand and approach discussing the history of the lute, or maybe how it was used, how it was played, since you have so many great colleagues lute players in Basel. It's such a good place to be. So yeah, what's your perspective on that?
Well, my personal experience with the lute was that different lute players are extremely opinionated on their own ideas, and it was hard for me to trust anyone. Even if I go to someone that I really, I know he studied a lot, and he said, yeah, this is for this, this is like this, and then I go to another one and he said, no, I got it all wrong. So that's a little bit my problem at the moment with the lute world. I of course could just choose one that seems more trustworthy, but I would need to feel that I really understand it. And in a way, the lute world is a little bit separated because you have your own secret notation, right?
Yeah, tablature.
Exactly. and I have my own lute colleague who plays with me, and I know he can do the things that we need, and it's great. But yeah, researching, I was always very intimidated by all the lute researchers. And once I tried to do my own research, and of course they told, no, you're completely wrong. So I went away a little bit, I guess.
I've noticed that as well. I'm by no means a researcher like you are. I'm more of a performer who entertains these ideas and has to deal with them because I'm performing and I have to make decisions. And I'm interested in the history, which is why I like your channel so much. But since I'm not doing the research, I have also the same experience as you. I mean, I can read the sources, but I've also encountered in my own playing so much divisiveness around certain topics that I think comes down to normal things, though, that maybe exist in every instrument a little bit. Tribalism, feelings of like maybe arguments from authority. This person says this, although we can't find a source to back it up, they're trustworthy, and then they have a following. And so it seems to be, in my own experience, I've had so many different conversations with different lute players, like you say. I mean, the subject of nails, that alone is one that evokes so much intense discussion. I mean, certain people just have bought into this idea that the lute, as if there was one lute, for example, was played without nails. So you have 400 years of an instrument with all different shapes and sizes and strings, and some people played with, some people played without. So it's always more complicated and nuanced. And so although I'm not a researcher, when I go in and actually read the sources, that's one of the things I discover is they disagree with each other. The sources themselves, and from similar times, one person will say, "You'll never play sweetly and make your each note sound like a pearl with a nail." And then a guitarist in around 1800 will say, "I've never heard anybody play with nails who can make a beautiful tone." And then you hear someone say that nails are absolutely necessary to make a beautiful sound. It's taste. It's people at this moment of time saying, "I preferred it this way. I preferred it this way."
Absolutely. Yeah. It's and many themes in early music are like this. So I think it comes back to what we talked in the beginning a little bit. What I try to do with colleagues is to put things on the table. And if I don't know what you said about the nails, but it sounds like a typical issue, that you have a question and then you get 10 answers.
Yeah.
So to put them all on the table, and for people to kind of do what they want, because of course they can do what they want, and it's fine.
Yes. I have one other question for you. Why bring early music sources from just being a website with the actual resources there? Why bring that to YouTube, and how did that happen?
Yeah, I guess that there are some ideas that are hard to convey in traditional ways, such as articles or even live lectures. The medium of animation gives you so much when presenting anything, but specifically when presenting music theory.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about a music example. If you print it in an article, and you want to convey a certain transformation, or you add this and then you add that and then this turns into this and you put this voice below. Imagine how many music examples you'll need, right? Or that you analyze some piece and then you clutter the music example with tons of little text and arrows, and with animation you can make those things so clear and so easy. So I think the medium is specifically great for music, and I like to do it, and it's fun.
I think so too. Do you do the video work and the graphics yourself? Do you have a team? How does that work?
Yeah, I do everything by myself. It's just the scripts that rarely it's just my own work, because somehow I exhausted, I think, my knowledge after more than 60 episodes. So I often collaborate with other people who, you know, also read the sources and can comment. And also now I feel slightly more responsibility, because I know that many musicians and teachers and early music lovers from all over the world, they look up to my videos. So I feel the responsibility to, you know, say responsible statements.
Well, that's something that yeah, you should know, is that my colleagues here in Chicago, I mean, on an early music gig, I mean, I hear people talking about your videos. I mean, you're making an impact for sure. I mean, that's obvious. But in my own experience, I've heard people talking about them and learning from them as well. Besides just me, so keep doing it, man. I mean, it's great. I think it's such a force for good. In terms of going forward with your YouTube channel and website, do you have goals that are outside of the scope of what you've been doing so far, or do you imagine yourself just continuing doing the same type of videos on different subjects? What's the future of the website?
It's a good question. I have no clue. So first of all, the sources database is there, you know. So it's not many new sources are getting in. It's just there to help anyone. And the same with the videos. I think I see them a little bit differently from some other online creators, in the sense that I really create them for them to stay, you know, to be like a book on a shelf. And whenever someone in, I don't know how many years, maybe 5 or 6 years, will want to pick one of them, it will still be relevant for him. And then the other thing that I would actually like to do is translate more treatises. There are so many treatises to be translated. But for this, you really need a lot of money.
Really?
And the moment we do it extremely slow, and the people who translate it get a completely symbolic amount.
Okay.
I mean, which is also, I mean, I don't make much money of it also. It's also kind of symbolic. We do it out of love for the thing.
Sure.
But if there is something that I would like to do more, is produce more translations, because there are so many interesting sources that are either not available at all or just not available in English. And this would be great to change.
Exactly. There are a number of sources which I only understand through my very bad Google Translate. I type the words in, you know, and of course it's 17th century Italian or something, and I'm typing it into Google Translate. I'm trying to get a sense of what it's saying.
No, it's terrible. It's terrible.
And I'm not understanding. I'm making up, you know, what it doesn't help me. So
if you give it to several specialists, they will fight among themselves, you know, on the meaning and so on.
what are the ways you could be more well-funded? Are you seeking for kind of like, I think you have a Patreon account at Early Music Sources?
Yeah, I have a Patreon. That's the main thing.
Okay, so if someone wanted to support you and help you get the funding, that maybe would be the best way?
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'll include a link to your Patreon and encourage my viewers here to check that out and consider supporting. I mean, it's such a great, as you've heard me sort of, you know, advocating for what you're doing. Of course, I believe in it so much, the project, and so I think it'd be a great cause to support. Elam, is there any other anything else you want to say in terms of how people can learn more about you? Any type of music group you work with or a project you have coming up that you want to let people know about?
Maybe people can check out the recent recording of my ensemble, Profeti della Quinta. We recently recorded the Lamentations of Emilio de Cavalieri, which is specifically a piece that really changed my musical life and draw me into early music. I heard about it first time 2006 or something like this, and since then I studied its manuscript, I made an edition of it, I wrote my PhD about it, and I composed a complete piece inspired by the musical language of it, and I performed it, so it really changed my musical life, and I'm happy to finally be able to make my own version of it.
Very cool. Well, congrats on that, and I look forward to listening myself. Okay, well, Elam, I so appreciate your time, and it was really nice to finally talk to you after following your work online, and it's just a real pleasure.
It was my pleasure too. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.